But on the third day, I will rise again. Now, if you read that from the Gospels, you think like, well, it's clear, he's going to rise again. Problem solved. But if you don't know that, let's just suppose you live before that event that happened.
Yeah.
You have a certain imagination. Talk about expectations. Remember what I said in the beginning? And you have a certain expectation. Jesus, the Messiah, is going to do something. And he's telling, listen up guys, listen. I'm going to Jerusalem and I'm going to suffer. It's like as if they were listening through a filter. Have you ever had that? Sometimes with kids, you can say like, you need to obey, and the kids are like, it seems like they're in another world or something, whatever it is. With adults, it can also sometimes be a little bit like that. You have a certain mindset that something is going to happen, and it's going to happen exactly like that, and if a person then all of a sudden says, no, it's going to happen that way, it seems like you delete that. Control-Alt-Delete right away. You didn't even hear it. The same thing is still, yeah, that's something else probably. Just delete it. For the computer freaks here, it's like, what is he saying? It's like, no. We listen all through a filter. We understand things through a certain framework. Now this is about the women. What about the disciples? Why didn't the disciples go early in the morning to the tomb to see what was going on? After all, how many times did Jesus tell his disciples that he would die and resurrect? Well, if we read the Gospels, it was at least 4 times. Not once, not twice. Once you might have missed it, like Thomas or something. He was doing something else. I don't know what it is. You missed it once. Okay, you missed it twice. But 3 or 4 times. By the time that he said it the 4th time, probably he said like, okay, so things are going to play out a bit differently than that. But they still didn't get it. In fact, nobody got it. The women didn't get it. The disciples didn't get it. Other followers of Jesus Christ, they didn't get it. The angel said, remember what he said? That he would go to Galilee, he would go ahead of you, and he would resurrect. He would come back from the dead. That cannot hold him, because he is without sin. That has no right to keep him the way it is. So the women went to the disciples to come with the beautiful news that Jesus is alive. Now you need to understand that in those days that a report from women in that culture was not very reliable. People say like, oh, it's from that person, a woman, Mary Magdalene, a person from the streets. Not a very good reputation. They wouldn't listen. So the disciples heard the story. The women, can you imagine? Oh Grace, he is alive! He's alive! And then John, the disciple, is saying, and it says actually also in Luke, it says like, you know what you're talking? It's nonsense, it's idle tales, that's what it's saying. You can read it in verse, 11. And that word seemed to them like idle tales. How is that for a discouragement? You know the bucket challenge, when you throw a bucket of ice on somebody saying like, I don't believe in that. We go to a second story. The story continues a little bit further. We read in verse, 13, that there is now a group of people, actually 2, that were walking from Jerusalem to a little village called Emmaus. I hope you pronounce it that way. It says in verse 13 the following. Now behold, 2 of them were traveling the same day to a village called Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem, about 11 kilometers. Not very far. You can do that in a day, easily. Well, not for me, I'm not so fast with it, but you should be able to do it. And when they talked together of all things that had happened, suddenly there was somebody that started walking together with these 2 people. We don't know exactly who they were. One, we do have a name if you read from the other Gospels, Cleopas, but we don't know that much about him. I can just imagine the scene again. I see this man disappointed with the scene that just happened in Jerusalem. They were expecting the Messiah finally to appear and to be the great ruler that everybody was hoping for, and then he was crucified as a criminal on a cross. Just imagine. Remember what I was talking about, expectations? You really want something, and then it doesn't happen. I can imagine the disappointment that happened. You see, the thing about expectations is that it can really crush people. These people, these two men, they were walking in the wrong direction, obviously, we know. They should have stayed in Jerusalem because there everything was going to start. But their expectations were not met. Actually, they were very disappointed by the Jewish religious leaders that were afraid of the power struggle with Jesus. They're like, this guy is really, really dangerous. So we might as well just put him away. They arrested him in the evening, put him on trial in the evening, which was illegal in Israel. Wasn't allowed to do that. And as they did it, they made sure that things would be taken care of. Give a little bit of money here, a little bit of corruption there, and Jesus was put to death. I think religion very often can do that with people. Sometimes you put your expectations on somebody, and then all of a sudden, they violate your expectations so much. And you start getting very frustrated. A lot of people in Holland, in Brazil, in Australia, many other nations, they are very suspicious towards Christianity. The teachings of Jesus, they understand them to a certain degree, and they might even like. But it is the religious part. What you see now in plain sight, religious leaders putting an innocent man on the cross. For what? Because he was defying their power. Religion is an overpromiser, but it's sadly an underperformer. Did you get that? Religion is an overpromiser. You do these 7 steps and then you're in a great place. You do this, you do that, but it's an underperformer. It promises you sometimes a better life, health, wealth, prosperity, all of that stuff, but it doesn't really satisfy. And you know what? Religion cannot do that. Only a relationship can. A relationship with God can clearly satisfy the God-shaped hole that we all had when we were born. We were born, as the Bible says, in Adam. That means that our natural inclinations from day one is that we walk away from God. Now you may look at a baby and think, oh, it's so little cute, and the baby turns 1 and it turns 2, and all of a sudden it starts to have this mind of its own and thinking like, oh, what is with this baby? This baby suddenly starts doing all kind of things that you don't need to teach that to a child, right? Let me ask the teachers here in the room, like, do you need to teach that to the... No, right? The kids know that. It's the fact that we all were estranged from God. Something got lost in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve said, like, all this thing with knowledge, and knowing good from bad and stuff, but I think it's interesting. And they were separated from God. And the image of God, we were supposed to reflect His glory got lost. But there's another Bible verse that I like so much that is important for us to understand. And it says in Romans 5, chapter 8, where Paul says the following: But God demonstrated His love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Yes, it's true that people have the natural inclination to wander away from God. But at the same time, it's true that while we were still sinners, not because we got our act together, we cleaned up our mess already, no. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And in that sense, God showed His love towards all of us here. I think that's so amazing. I have just a simple question for you tonight. What do you expect from Jesus this season? Can you believe that He can resurrect your situation? There are people perhaps here that are in a very difficult situation, whatever it is. Maybe it's related to health. Maybe it's related to something very different. It's one thing to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. And it's the greatest miracle on earth, obviously. It's another thing to take hold of the power of the resurrection that is in us. His word says it's the same Spirit that rose Jesus Christ from the dead that also lives inside of you and me. It's that same Spirit. If we know who is living inside of us, probably we would start looking at our problems and our little issues very differently. Very differently. And the women started seeing it. Instead of seeing the issues and the problems and the bad memories of what happened just a few days before, God started shaping it, started changing it. Jesus is alive. Do you believe that?
Amen.
He is alive. He is risen. And He can resurrect any hopeless situation that we might be in. Because He is Lord. Now the question is obviously, do we focus on what we are not? Or do we focus perhaps on all the life issues that sometimes seem to overwhelm us? I don't know how you came here. Maybe there were already a zillion of things on your mind, of things that still need to happen somewhere throughout this week. Do we even put expectations on God? Remember the Amos folks? They were putting expectations on how the Messiah would, kick the Romans out and everything. And then when things don't happen, you start getting upset. How many people got upset with the church, for instance? Got upset with a Christian friend or somebody because he might have said something. Jesus doesn't let you down. People sometimes can let you down. I've been let down many, many times in my life. Not just as a pastor, but as somebody that was attending a church. But do we let that have the last word in our lives? The work is really finished. When Jesus said, "It is done, it is finished," it was enough. It was enough. It was settled.